Unhappiness in the individual is this complex, I'd say, dance of both these external and internal factors, and they're woven together in a way that makes one really hard to separate from the other. So while external situations can really influence emotional states, like through difficult relationships, career struggles, societal pressures, right? The root of unhappiness is really within ourselves. And these internal factors, like one's thoughts, beliefs, past experiences, or unhealed wounds, right? They play these really pivotal roles here in their sense of happiness or unhappiness. And it's this combination of both realms, though. It's the external triggering the internal patterns, and the internal lenses distorting how we perceive and interact with the external world. And accountability is key here, okay? It's not about placing blame on oneself for circumstances outside of your own control, but it's about owning one's reactions to those circumstances, right? It's the ability to look inward and recognize how we are interpreting and responding to life's challenges. And why? Why should we be accountable? Because to take ownership of our emotions, our thoughts, and our actions is to regain control over them. It's empowering, right? And accountability liberates us from the victim mentality that perpetuates unhappiness. It moves us from being passive recipients of our experiences to active creators of our emotional landscapes. So this kind of consistent complaining, it's an exhausting cycle, and it arises from this deep sense of dissatisfaction. But there's an unwillingness to find solutions, though. There's some sort of satisfaction within the complaint itself. And instead of seeking ways to improve, the individual remains fixated on the problem, recycling the same complaints over and over and over and over. And emotionally, this is really taxing because it creates a stagnant environment where progress is stifled and negativity becomes the dominant energy. And when somebody is constantly complaining, it can feel like an emotional drain for others because they're pulled into that energy and they're forced to either listen or attempt to offer a solution that might not even be wanted, right? It's like the dynamic becomes one of emotional labor where others have to carry the burden of both the person's discontent and the energy required to address it. So this happiness, it isn't something that can be given or taken by the external world. Okay? It isn't a result of accumulating material possessions or constantly chasing the next thing or the new job or the new toy, right? The new television set or the new car. This true happiness arises from within ourselves. It's an alignment with self. It's a state of acceptance and peace with the present moment. It's a freedom from attachment to outcomes and a release of the narrative that we are incomplete without certain things. This kind of true happiness comes from when we feel connected to something larger than ourselves, whether it's through purpose, spirituality, or simply a sense of contentment. It's found in the present, in small moments of gratitude, peace, and self-awareness. So the pursuit of happiness, it doesn't lie in waiting for the world to change around you, right? It lies in transforming how you engage with both the world and yourself. And when we start asking, why am I unhappy? And replace that with, what within me is resisting peace? We shift from being at the mercy of circumstances to the masters of our own internal emotional landscapes. And when we look deeper into unhappiness, we have to recognize that much of it is rooted in our relationship with ourselves. The majority of it, right? That 90%, 95% plus. We often get caught in the cycle of wanting some sort of external validation, right? The approval of others or a particular outcome to bring us peace. And the irony is that peace and happiness can't be sourced from the external world. They can only be nurtured from within ourselves. And when we place our happiness on things, external things outside of ourselves, right? Whether it's a job, a partner, or an accomplishment, we're setting ourselves up for disappointment. Because these things, they're transient and they're unpredictable. Life has a way of shifting, and external sources of satisfaction can just be fleeting, right? And this brings us back to self-accountability, the act of looking inward rather than outward for emotional well-being. It's about taking responsibility for how we respond to life. Are we consumed by frustration over things that are beyond our control? Or are we cultivating resilience, understanding, and compassion towards ourselves? Right? And this is an ongoing daily practice. We have to be consistent with these things. We have to be consistent with practicing this resilience and cultivating this understanding and compassion towards ourselves. And accountability doesn't mean we ignore the realities of suffering or injustice. It means we stop giving our power away to circumstances. And instead of asking, why me? We can ask, what can I learn from this with sincerity, right? And this shift in perspective, it requires a certain amount of courage because it involves facing the parts of ourselves that are uncomfortable. It means confronting the narratives we've built about who we are. And those stories often have roots in past trauma or unexamined patterns of thought, right? So the courageous act here, it's not in waiting for the external world to change, but in embracing our inner world and reshaping the way we view and relate to it. So as difficult as this sounds, the heart of transformation lies in this internal recalibration, right? The outer world, it might be chaotic, but our inner world where we hold the reins here, it can be a sanctuary of peace, right? The complaining pattern we mentioned earlier often stems from this sense of powerlessness, wanting control. People who consistently complain may feel they have no control at all, no agency to shift their circumstances, right? But complaining doesn't change the situation. It only keeps one in the position of a victim, always. It's a way of expressing discomfort without taking action, or not knowing how to take action, not knowing that there is action, not understanding that we can form something within ourselves which is resilient, right? And there's this subtle, though strong pull in complaining to remain stagnant, to allow oneself to be defined by the problem instead of forming a solution. Right? And here lies the emotional cost to others. The energy that comes with constant complaining, it's draining. It pulls others into a negative space and often compels them to either try to fix something that might not be fixable or feel burdened by the person's inability or their unwillingness to take accountability for their own emotional state. And over time, this behavior can create a sense of resentment from those who are on the receiving end of it because they feel they're being asked to carry emotional weight that isn't theirs. Right? It's a silent demand for energy, attention, and sympathy, which, while valid in moments of real need, becomes overwhelming when it's habitual. This happiness, as elusive as it might be, isn't something we have to chase. It's something we cultivate. It requires shifting the focus from what's wrong to what's right, from what's missing to what's already here. And we can begin by practicing gratitude, not as a forced exercise, but as a genuine acknowledgement of the goodness that already exists in our life. It's this subtle shift of mind and heart that recognizes the gift of life in its simplest form, right? The ability to breathe, to think, to feel. So this true happiness is found in acceptance of ourselves, of others, and of the impermanence of life. It's in letting go of the need to control and surrendering to the flow of life itself, knowing that like the ebb and flow of the tides, everything is in constant motion, including our emotional states. When we release our attachment to the idea of happiness as a destination, we realize that it's always within us. The contentment, the peace, the joy. It's all waiting for us to look inward and acknowledge it and develop it through that acknowledgement. The continual acknowledgement is the developmental process. And when we are able to accept ourselves fully, including our flaws, our mistakes, and our imperfections, we create space for the natural flow of happiness to emerge here. It's in the release of this self-judgment, in the letting go of these harsh internal critic that says we are not enough, that happiness finds a way to break through. And once we let go of the constant search for external validation, we discover that we are enough exactly as we are in this moment. And in this sense, happiness isn't a pursuit, but it's a return to a state of being. It's a natural state of wholeness. It arises when we stop looking outside of ourselves for validation and start validating our own existence, our own worth. When we can take a look at ourselves in the mirror with compassion instead of judgment, and we step into the fullness of who we truly are. And when we do this, our external circumstances, they begin to align with our inner state, because we no longer need them to provide the validation or the happiness which we seek. So this true happiness, then, it's not the absence of challenges or hardships, right? It's the ability to maintain a sense of inner peace and alignment despite them. It's being able to navigate through life's inevitable storms without losing our center, knowing that our happiness doesn't depend on the weather outside, but it's on the calm within ourselves. Namaskar.